Ever heard someone mention the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and wondered just what in the world they're talking about? I'm Baird McCarthy, and I will tell you what in the world they're talking about. The conflict has been around since the early 1900s, but to understand it, one must first understand the history of something called Zionism, which goes back a little bit further.
So what is Zionism? Zionism is a political idea based primarily on Jewish author Theodor Herzl's 1896 manifesto entitled The Jewish State. In The Jewish State, Herzl declares that Jews had been oppressed too much in their history and that the only viable solution to end this oppression would be to establish a Jewish state in Palestine. Palestine is historically a region in the Middle East located between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. Herzl's ideas became popular in Jewish communities around the world. However, they weren't without their opposition. One notable Jewish group which has opposed Zionism are Hasidic Jews, who believe that the existence of the State of Israel breaks a rule made in Ketubot 111a of the Talmud, in which Rabbi Zeira maintains that the oath mentioned in a verse of the Torah means that the Jews should not ascend to Eretz Yisrael as a wall, i.e. en masse, whereas individuals may immigrate as they wish. These Hasidic Jews are considered to be on the fringes of the Jewish community because of their hardcore religious views. Another Jewish group which has opposed Zionism historically is the General Jewish Labor Bund in Lithuania, Poland, and Russia. The Bund, as it was often called, was a socialist organization which opposed Zionism because it perceived it as a reactionary ideology which was not really connected to the Jews of Eastern Europe and their struggles. The Bund eventually fell into obscurity after many of its members decided to leave and join the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union for a while supported their goals of a Jewish community in Eastern Europe. However, this eventually changed after World War II. Another particularly interesting group which opposed Zionism back in the day were the Jewish territorialists, who did not want to create a Jewish state in Palestine, but rather would be satisfied with a Jewish state anywhere in the world, and thought that seeking Palestine specifically was unrealistic. Anyway, despite all of these groups, many Jews began to immigrate to Palestine following its occupation by the British Empire in World War I. The British Empire was actually the first world power to support Zionism, and it used this to its advantage in its governance of Palestine because it was able to pit Jews and native Palestinians against each other instead of focusing their efforts on the British imperialists. But eventually, in 1948, the British Empire finally allowed the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine. This state would come to be known as the State of Israel in English and Medinat Yisrael in Hebrew, which is the country's primary language. Because Israel did not control the entirety of the region of Palestine, what remained was divided between the Kingdom of Egypt and the Kingdom of Jordan, which had both previously been subjects of the British Empire. However, in 1952, Egypt would have a coup led by Mohammed Naguib, an Egyptian military officer who did not like the kingdom. However, he was later deposed by his second-in-command, Jamal Abdel Nasser, who was a pan-Arab socialist, meaning he wanted to unite all Arab countries into one united Arab republic, which would have a semi-socialist economy. Israel maintained very poor relations with its Arabic neighbors, and the tensions that resulted would eventually lead to the 1967 war between Israel, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. Israel managed to triumph in the war by bombing the entire Egyptian Air Force before the war even started. This allowed them to have a very swift victory with few Israeli losses. Because of its victory in the war, Israel actually managed to occupy the remaining territories of Palestine, which had previously been given to Egypt and Jordan. This would cause much of the later Palestinian and Israeli conflict.
Israel has claimed that it supports the creation of a Palestinian state in these occupied territories. However, that has still not happened in the 54 years since the war. Furthermore, many Israeli officials, including some prime ministers, have stated their staunch opposition to the creation of such a country.
Because of the many abuses which they face at the hands of Israelis, many Palestinians have sought to fight back by joining groups such as the Fatah, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which are both part of the Palestine Liberation Organization, Hamas, or Hezbollah. Many have also tried to fight back in intifadas, or uprisings, against Israeli occupation. There have been 2 intifadas so far, although some may try to classify the events of the previous couple weeks as a third intifada.
So what are some ways that have been proposed to end this conflict?
The primary internationally recognized solution right now is the creation of a Palestinian state in the occupied territories of Israel. This is the so-called two-state solution. However, there have been increasingly more calls around the world for a one-state solution, which would either be a binational state, a Palestinian state, or an Israeli state. A one Israeli state comprising the entirety of Palestine has been popular among Israel's far right.
In the end, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is fairly complicated, and I recommend you do some more research on the topic, including by looking at my website. Thank you.